Punch, Brothers, Punch by Mark Twain. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Roger Moline. Punch, Brothers, Punch by Mark Twain. Will the reader please to cast his eye over the following lines and see if he can discover anything harmful in them? Conductor, when you receive a fare, punch in the presence of the passenger. A blue trip slip for an 8-cent fare, a buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare, a pink trip slip for a 3-cent fare, punch in the presence of the passenger. Punch, brothers, punch with care, punch in the presence of the passenger. I came across these jingling rhymes in a newspaper a little while ago, and read them a couple of times. They took instant and entire possession of me. All through breakfast they went waltzing through my brain, and when at last I rolled up my napkin, I could not tell whether I had eaten anything or not. I had carefully laid out my day's work the day before, thrilling tragedy in the novel which I am writing. I went to my den to begin my deed of blood. I took up my pen, but all I could get it to say was, "Punch in the presence of the passenger." I fought hard for an hour, but it was useless. My head kept humming, "A blue trip slip for an 8-cent fare, a buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare," and so on, without peace or respite. The day's work was ruined, I could see that plainly enough. I gave up and drifted downtown, and presently discovered that my feet were keeping time to that relentless jingle. When I could stand it no longer, I altered my step. But it did no good. Those rhymes accommodated themselves to the new step and went on harassing me just as before. I returned home and suffered all the afternoon, suffered all through an unconscious and unrefreshing dinner, suffered and cried and jingled all through the evening, went to bed and rolled, tossed and jingled right along, the same as ever. Got up at midnight, frantic, and tried to read. But there was nothing visible upon the whirling pages except "Punch, punch in the presence of the passenger." By sunrise I was out of my mind, and everybody marveled and was distressed at the idiotic burden of my ravings. Punch, oh punch, punch in the presence of the passenger. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, I arose, a tottering wreck, and went forth to fulfill an engagement with a valued friend, the Reverend Mr. X, to walk to the Talcott Tower 10 miles distant. He stared at me, but asked no questions. We started. Mr. X talked, as is his wont. I said nothing. I heard nothing. At the end of a mile, Mr. X said, "Mark, are you sick? I never saw a man look so haggard and worn and absent-minded. Say something. Do." Drearily, without enthusiasm, I said, "Punch, brothers, punch with care, punch in the presence of the passenger." My friend eyed me blankly, looked perplexed, then said, "I do not think I get your drift, Mark. There does not seem to be any relevancy in what you have said, certainly nothing sad, and yet maybe it was the way you said the words. I never heard anything that sounded so pathetic. What is—" But I heard no more. I was already far away with my pitiless, heartbreaking blue trip slip for an 8-cent fare, buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare, pink trip slip for a 3-cent fare, punch in the presence of the passenger. I do not know what occurred during the other 9 miles. However, all of a sudden, Mr. X laid his hand on my shoulder and shouted, "Oh, wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Don't sleep all day. Here we are at the tower, man. I have talked myself deaf and dumb and blind, and never got a response. Just look at this magnificent autumn landscape. Look at it. Look at it. Feast your eye on it. You have traveled. You have seen Boaster landscapes elsewhere. Come now, deliver an honest opinion. What do you say to this? I sighed wearily and murmured, "A buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare, a pink trip slip for a 3-cent fare. Punch in the presence of the passenger." Reverend Mr. X stood there, very grave, full of concern apparently, and looked long at me. Then he said, "Mark, there is something about this that I cannot understand. Those are about the same words you said before. There does not seem to be anything in them, and yet they nearly break my heart when you say them. Punch in the... how is it they go?" I began at the beginning and repeated all the lines. My friend's face lighted with interest. He said, "Why, what a captivating jingle it is! It is almost music. It flows along so nicely. I have nearly caught the rhymes myself. Say them over just once more, and then I'll have them, sure." I said them over. Then Mr. X said them. He made one little mistake which I corrected. The next time, and the next, he got them right. Now a great burden seemed to tumble from my shoulders. That torturing jingle departed out of my brain, and a grateful sense of rest and peace descended upon me. I was light-hearted enough to sing, and I did sing for half an hour, straight along, as we went jogging homeward. Then my freed tongue found blessed speech again, and the pent talk of many a weary hour began to gush and flow. It flowed on, joyously, jubilantly, until the fountain was empty and dry. As I wrung my friend's hand at parting, I said, "Haven't we had a royal good time? But now I remember, you haven't said a word for 2 hours. Come, come, out with something." The Reverend Mr. X turned a lackluster eye upon me, drew a deep sigh, and said, without animation, without apparent consciousness, "Punch, brothers, punch with care, punch in the presence of the passenger." A pang shot through me as I said to myself, "Poor fellow, poor fellow! He has got it now." I did not see Mr. X for 2 or 3 days after that. Then on Tuesday evening he staggered into my presence and sank dejectedly into a seat. He was pale, worn, he was a wreck. He lifted his faded eyes to my face and said, "Ah, Mark, it was a ruinous investment that I made in those heartless rhymes. They have ridden me like a nightmare, day and night, hour after hour, to this very moment. Since I saw you, I have suffered the torments of the lost. Saturday evening I had a sudden call, by telegraph, and took the night train for Boston. The occasion was the death of a valued old friend who had requested that I should preach at his funeral sermon. I took my seat in the cars and set myself to framing the discourse. But I never got beyond the opening paragraph, for then the train started and the car wheels began their clack, clack clack, clack clack, clack clack, clack clack clack, and right away those odious rhymes fitted themselves to that accompaniment. For an hour I sat there and set a syllable of those rhymes to every separate and distinct clack the car wheels made. Why, I was as fagged out then as if I had been chopping wood all day. My skull was splitting with headache. It seemed to me that I must go mad if I sat there any longer, so I undressed and went to bed. I stretched myself out in my berth, and, well, you know what the result was. The thing went right along, just the same. Clack, 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 a blue trip slip. Clack, 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 for an 8-cent fare. Clack, 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 a buff trip slip. Clack, 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 for a 6-cent fare. And so on, and so on, and so on. Punch in the presence of the passenger. Sleep? Not a single wink. I was almost a lunatic when I got to Boston. Don't ask me about the funeral. I did the best I could, but every solemn individual sentence was meshed and tangled and woven in and out with "Punch, brothers, punch with care, punch in the presence of the passenger." And the most distressing thing was that my delivery dropped into the undulating rhythm of those pulsating rhymes, and I could actually catch absent-minded people nodding time to the swing of it with their stupid heads. And Mark, you may believe it or not, but before I got through, the entire assemblage were placidly bobbing their heads in solemn unison, mourners, undertaker, and all. The moment I had finished, I fled to the anteroom in a state bordering on frenzy. Of course it would be my luck to find a sorrowing and aged maiden aunt of the deceased there, who had arrived from Springfield too late to get into the church. She began to sob, and said, "Oh, oh, he is gone, and I didn't see him before he died." "Yes," I said, "he is gone, he is gone, he is gone. Oh, will this suffering never cease?" "You loved him, then! Oh, you too loved him!" "Loved him? Loved who?" "Why, my poor George, my poor nephew." "Oh, him! Yes, oh, yes, yes, certainly, certainly. Punch, punch. Oh, this misery will kill me." Bless you, sir, for these sweet words. I, too, suffer in this dear loss. Were you present during his last moments?" "Yes. I—" "Whose last moments?" "His. The dear departed's." "Yes. Oh, yes, yes. Yes, I suppose so. I think so. I don't know. Oh, certainly I was there. I was there." "Oh, what a privilege! What a precious privilege! And his last words! Oh, tell me his last words. What did he say?" "He said, oh, my head, my head, my head! He never said anything but punch, punch, punch in the presence of the passenger. Oh, leave me, madam! In the name of all that is generous, leave me to my madness, my misery, my despair. A buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare, a pink trip slip for a 3-cent fare. Endurance can no further go. Punch in the presence of the passenger." My friend's hopeless eyes rested upon mine a pregnant minute, and then he said impressively: "Mark, you do not say anything. You do not offer me any hope. But, ah me, it is just as well. It is just as well. You could not do me any good. The time has long gone by when words could comfort me. Something tells me that my tongue is doomed to wag forever to the jigger of that remorseless jingle. There it is coming on me again. A blue trip slip for an 8-cent fare, a buff trip slip for a—" Thus murmuring faint and fainter, my friend sank into a peaceful trance and forgot his sufferings in a blessed respite. How did I finally save him from an asylum? I took him to a neighboring university and made him discharge the burden of his persecuting rhymes into the eager ears of the poor, unthinking students. How is it with them now? The result is too sad to tell. Why did I write this article? It was for a worthy, even a noble purpose. It was to warn you, reader, if you should come across those merciless rhymes, to avoid them. Avoid them as you would a pestilence. End of Punch Brothers Punch by Mark Twain. Recording by Roger Moline.